It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast. On today's episode, we'll be talking about 7 traits of effective biblical parenting. And we'll get to that important discussion right after these important messages. This episode of the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast is presented by Faulkner University. Faulkner University is a private Christian liberal arts university based in Montgomery, Alabama, with a mission to provide an education anchored by not only intellect, but also character and service. The Faulkner experience aims to educate the whole person. Every individual matters every day. We all want to become better versions of ourselves. No one wants to remain trapped where they are because of missed opportunities and unrealized dreams. At Faulkner University, we believe your dreams don't have an expiration date. We understand that you're looking for more than a degree. You want to find your niche and thrive in your career. Whether you're a high school senior just beginning your trek or an adult student looking for a better path, Faulkner is here to help guide your journey. Go to faulkner.edu to apply or get more info. That's faulkner.edu. I'm Travis Creasy, and that's All-Pro Counselor with 3-Chord Counseling in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. And as we record this, the birthday boy himself, Ben Hayes. What's going on, Ross?
Man, I'm doing great. Just hanging in, hanging out, hanging on, and just getting to spend some time with you, which is always a great thing. So
it's a privilege, really. It's a privilege.
It is. It's a privilege and an honor, sir.
Well, one of the things that data has shown, we talk about the idea of privilege, is if you have both parents, if you grew up with both parents in the home, that has been shown to be a tremendous amount of privilege, quotation marks, and impacts greatly the success of kids. And we know that the percentage is very high of kids, and we're not sitting here saying that you can't be successful, or at least I hope not, because I came from such a home. But the more privileged that is, because it's lower percentage of that being the case. And certainly as we think about and get into this conversation, we think about Liberté Ministries, who is doing a tremendous job in Haiti in helping those who do not have parents in Haiti. I know that they have an orphanage that they work with and they support, and we certainly know that they do that off the funds of supporters like yourself, if you're listening to this. And one of the ways, actually 2 of the ways in which we're trying to help, you can find both at travisloveshaiti.com. You can donate a Bible for $5 in the Haitian language, and we will match the first 20 that are donated. And you can also sign up your congregation or your group to host the Liberté Ministry guys come in and share the information and what they're doing in the country of Haiti. So please check out travisloveshaiti.com or benandtravis.com/Ben Loves Haiti.
I get to be included in that. Great.
I'm assuming you love Haiti too. So
I do love Haiti too, and I'm thankful that we get to do that. So go out there and support them. I think that's a great thing. So as we think about the 7 traits of effective parenting, we found some of these on Focus on the Family, their website. And as we looked at these, we thought, hey, it'd be a great thing for us to review them, think about them, maybe add some things to them, and maybe you out there can add some things to them. But with every family, whether it is both the parents in the home, a blended family in the home, a single parent in the home, these are things all of you can do. And so regardless of what situation you find yourself in, because there are a lot of different situations out there, as Travis said, he grew up in a broken home, and so we all find ourselves in different situations. So here's 7 habits or 7 traits that can help the family be as strong as it can. And so we just kind of wanted to review these. The first one they said was just simply maybe the one that we would all want to say is love.
Love is the bedrock of this whole thing, man. It's the bedrock of the whole podcast, the bedrock of all the things that we're doing. And of course, Jesus talks about love as the foundation. That's where we're getting this from. And you can have all kinds of rules, and you can do much of the things that we're going to unpack for the rest of the episode, and to quote Paul, but if you have not love,
noisy gong.
Yes.
Clanging cymbal.
And I think that sometimes we may have that. I think social media certainly can be the noisy gong or a banging cymbal, because we kind of put out what you've said on many times, our highlight reel is on social media, and we may be, oh, I wish I loved like that family. But that family has issues too, and problems and difficulties. And I
100%.
think you said very well that these are all mobile. They're things that can be done in any group setting, right?
Right.
And they may change what they look like. But loving people, I think, is the foundation of which the rest of this discussion is built on.
Yeah, if there's not love, when God talks about the church, when he talks about family, when he talks about any of it, anything really, is the foundation is having love for people. And if you've got that part, if you can find that part, then you can do a whole lot of other things, and there'll probably be a lot of things forgiven if people understand that there's love involved. And I think a lot of times that's our biggest issue is people walk away not feeling that and not understanding that. People walk with the church sometimes because they don't feel like they were loved. And people, leave their family of origin sometimes feeling that way. Sometimes that's, because maybe their own things that they were taking into it and they didn't see it. But I think love is absolutely at the core of everything that we do if we don't have it. And I think one of the things that you find in the book of Ephesians when it's describing husbands and wives is it says, husbands, love your wives, and wives, see to it that you respect your husbands. And there's a mutual respect as kind of the second thing that needs to take place in the family, whether that's husbands respecting wives, wives respecting husbands, parents respecting their children. There's a sense in which we, have to show that respect. We're not trying to frustrate them, as it talked about sometimes in the scripture. But then the same way, children are to respect their family or the parents. So I think respect has to be a part of that as well.
Yes, these first two, and many of the other ones, but these first two for sure are reciprocal. To receive respect, you got to be respectable, and to love, you need to be lovable. That doesn't necessarily negate you of your demand from Scripture to love me or respect me if I'm not those things, but it certainly greases the wheels. And I think a lot of times, a few weeks ago, I read a scripture. I can't remember exactly the text, but it was something along those lines. It probably was from Ephesians, right? Where he talks about the two relationships. And oftentimes we read those texts with the other person in mind, as in, you need to be more loving. And certainly that's applicable, but we really should be reading the text and going, if I want Whitney's respect, have I been respectable? Have I been loving? Have I removed their excuse from not loving me and not respecting me? And then if I have, and they still don't love me and they still don't respect me, then I've done everything I could. That phrase, as far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. And so I just stood up there and read it. I said, let's read this as I am responsible for being these things and checklisting. Have I been respectable? Have I been lovable? And if I have done those things, then there is a responsibility on that person. And I don't know what the miscommunication or the disconnect is from, but am I doing all the things that I need to do to receive those two aspects?
Well, one of the things I tell people all the time when we're talking about marriage counseling is the scripture says, husbands, love your wives. It doesn't say, wives, make sure your husbands love you. And it says, wives, respect your husband. It doesn't say, husbands, make your wives respect you. There is a responsibility on that person to do what it said. And so it's my responsibility to show love and affection to my wife. And it's her responsibility to find that respect. Because I've said this a lot of times. I believe that, men are such that we like respect. We like to be appreciated. This is the way we're built. And women look for affection and want to feel that affection. And so if men are built for wanting and needing appreciation and respect, and women are built needing affection and love, then the same is true with our kids. When we have young men, we need to learn to show them that respect in the things that they do, and appreciating the things that they do. They need to hear that. One of the things that Jesus heard from the Father was, "This is my beloved son in whom I am" what? Well pleased, and to hear that from them was important. And then the same thing with our girls, our young ladies, show that affection to them. So love and respect. If you can show those two things in relationships, whether it's with husbands and wives, but most importantly for this discussion with our kids, I think that's important. And so the third thing that they talk about in Focus on the Family.com was they talked about intentionality. So, intentionality, when you hear that word, what do you think of, Travis?
Goes back to what you just said about love and respect, getting up and at some point during the day, and hopefully multiple times if you're spending a good amount of time together, being intentional about showing love and respect. Also, as we get into the next point, being intentional about why we do the things that we do. Being able to communicate that to your kids. Why do we get up and go to church on Sunday morning? And because grandma and grandpa did it, at some point that breaks down, and you need to have that conversation. One of the things that I do with my Bible classes at Riverside is, why do you believe what you believe? Why do you do what you do? Really in anything, but certainly spiritually considering the things that you do. And we all technically probably have a ritual of what we do throughout the week and how we do it. And so the more of that you can explain to your kids, Deuteronomy 6, I meant to mention this in the intro, it is the parents' biblical responsibility to educate their children first and foremost, and you are educating them one way or another, right? It's impossible unless you're just not with them and they live somewhere else. But anytime you're interacting with them, the same thing with their youth minister or their preacher or their coaches, those are intentional situations. Whether you're being intentional about them or not, they are going to be influenced by those things. And so the Bible is very clear that as I am a coach or youth minister, I am a secondary source for your kids. You are the one informing them, and they will be influenced one way or the other by what you're doing. And so it's very important to be intentional about those and explain them, which I think leads into the next point of boundaries and limits. But I'll let you speak on both of those.
Well, and I would say too, intentionality that I think about when I read that is being intentional about the time you spend with them. And you kind of touched on that, who you're putting in front of them, but also just spending time with them. We can love, we can respect, but I think there's a lot showing, in research and whatnot about just simply being with your kids. It helps you, it helps them, it helps them learn what relationships are supposed to look like. You and I have a son, real close in age. Our sons are real close in age, and they like to wrestle, and they like to, get rough out in the yard, or wrestle on the couches or whatever. And that time with them is so important. And the same thing with our girls, just spending that time playing with them and being intentional with the time that you have. And so I think that goes along with it. And then what you talked about with boundaries and limitations is the fourth thing, setting boundaries and talking about those. A lot of families have unspoken rules, unwritten rules, and kids get in trouble for them and they don't know why. Like they all of a sudden are in trouble and they're thinking, what did I do? I didn't break any rules, because it was some unwritten rule that us as parents grew up with, or think about, and they don't really know. So I think every kid needs limits, every kid needs boundaries, but sometimes they need to understand why those are boundaries. What's the reason I get a spanking, or what's the reason that I get a timeout for this certain thing? And as they get older, they can understand that more. So it's a constant change. When they're infants, when they're babies, they don't understand why you won't let them, put their finger into a socket or whatever, and they're not going to understand that concept. But as they get older, there's concepts they get, and we have to have those conversations. We have to, try to do our best to explain some of those things. And so going back to one of the things I recommend to parents a lot is the book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk, because they you learn some ways to communicate those boundaries and limitations.
I would say, along with being consistent, intentionality, boundaries and limits, consistency goes with, I think, both of those, and consistent in all these traits, I guess you could say.
Absolutely.
But if you set a rule and you have told them this is going to be the outcome, that better be the outcome. And I've found both, right? I've done both. I've done, hey, if you do that again, I'm going to get up and come over there. And I didn't want to get up and come over there.
Right.
And so I let it slip, or it hits me, hey, you said this was going to be the outcome. You've got to be consistent, go over there and have that consequence. And I've done both. But why am I upset? Why am I making this rule? Is it an ego thing, or is it something that is to their benefit? And certainly saying that sometimes an ego thing can be okay too, but why are we making these rules? And I think that's a good point, and certainly being consistent with the consequence. If you say you're going to do this, if they do that one more time, or if you've told them already, be consistent with the consequence, and certainly stepping all over my own toes right now because I'm a lazy bum when it comes to that. And I realize I've told them 3 times in a row that I was going to do this, and I still haven't done it. And then, you set up is it too late? Have I waited too long? Should I go back? One of those deals. So consistency on the intentional and the boundaries and limits.
Well, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4 says, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath or to anger, but bring them up in the nurture or the instruction, the discipline of the Lord. And so there is a written in piece of that says there's some frustration to parenting for your kids in your parenting if you're not consistent and you're not setting boundaries and you're not letting them know what those boundaries and limitations are about. Don't provoke them to anger, but rather, guide them and lead them and, nurture them in those relationships with God. And so there's a way in which we can parent that will cause frustration, and there's a way in which we can parent that's going to share with them and them understand. There's always going to be some things that frustrate our kids, right? That's just part of it. Mm-hmm. But the more that we can kind of help them understand the whys, sometimes there's not a good answer to the why, or they might not understand it, but we do our best to do that.
I think the next one is one of the difficult things to instill. And once again, I go to Deuteronomy 6, right? He starts telling them, when you come into lands that you didn't conquer, and you drink from cisterns that you didn't, or wells you didn't dig, and you eat food that you didn't plant, the temptation is going to be to take credit for it. Mm-hmm. And when you take credit for it, or you think that's the way it's always been, it gets real difficult to instill gratitude. Even for ourselves, that's a work in progress, right? With everything as fast as lightning, you get it. And if it's not there in a second, my kids don't know what commercials are for the most part. They're all skippable. But Paul tells us again, Thessalonians, right? 1 Thessalonians, to be thankful in every circumstance, for this is the will of God. And gratitude is such a hard part. Even as a coach, I look at my assistant coaches and go, do you think they'll ever understand everything that we do? You think they'll ever really understand it? And it's the same thing with our kids. And so hitting that balance of, yes, providing for them, even getting some of their wants, but instilling in them a gratitude is so hard and very difficult. And of course, it's even more difficult if we're not modeling that idea.
Yeah, I think as a trait for effective parenting, we've got to show gratitude, that we're thankful for the time that we get with them, that we're thankful to them for the things that they do, even when sometimes it's really frustrating because they don't do it the right way, or it's really frustrating because they didn't do everything we said. They only did a piece of it, and we ask them over and over, and they do those little things, but to at least show gratitude for what they do. Show gratitude for the time that you get with them. And so I think there's a lot that could be said about gratitude and modeling that for them. And hopefully what you see with them is that as they grow, they can show gratitude as well. But it's amazing how many times in the Bible, Paul, even in really difficult situations, seemed to always be able to point to gratitude. He was always rejoicing in the Lord, even though there was difficult circumstances. So, whether you've got, regardless of what the situation is that you live in, with the family, whether it's single parent home, blended family, your family of origin still being together, where you live, what your house looks, what your cars that you drive, finding some ways to show gratitude regardless of the circumstance that you find yourself in.
And that's one of the reasons, and this is not me judging or advising you if you're in this circumstance, it's one of the reasons we have been very open with our kids about being adopted, coming from the foster care system, and really pointing to God and saying, give gratitude to where it's deserved. And how much of the Bible, remember, I am the God who brought you out of Egypt. We do the Lord's Supper. Remember what Jesus has done for you, because remembrance and gratitude are tied together. How much worse could it be without God? How great is it with him? And so that gratitude, which ultimately comes from grace and forgiveness, which is great and couples with that being consistent on boundaries and limits. Yeah. Because when it does come time to have grace and forgiveness, they realize, oh, I could have had this consequence because of my action, and instead I'm getting forgiveness. And then sometimes it's mercy or grace. But either way, we're aiming for forgiveness and reconciliation in any of those circumstances.
Yeah, I heard something one day that said, we say a lot, we need to show grace, give grace. Will you give grace to me on this? And somebody said, when someone gives grace, the other person that person is sacrificing something. They're sacrificing their own wants to give you grace in those moments. And so we recognize that grace requires sacrifice. And so if I'm showing grace to my kids over something, then I may be sacrificing my wants and my needs to do that. And the same thing for them. When we ask them to show grace to us, it's sacrificing something of them, because we may say, hey, show grace because I'm missing this event or this thing because of work or whatever the case may be, and recognize that's for them to show us grace, it's hurting them, in those moments too. But that's where forgiveness and that's where love and that's where appreciation comes in. And so just recognizing that grace requires a sacrifice, and it did for Jesus and it does for us. And yet, what a great gift to show people, that I can sacrifice and show grace to you. And so I think seeing that and doing that within our families is so important. Again, that circles back to love, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. I mean, it circles back to what we talked about at the beginning.
And so the willingness to sacrifice is flexibility or adaptability. I think about God, going back to God, the connection there. How many things, Paul himself, speaking to Gentiles, he winked at our ignorance, but now he calls us all to repentance. Yeah. Even the Israelites, they mess up, they fall short, just as we all have. And does that negate the faithfulness of God? And so God has got this, and I try to tell my kids this, I love you no matter how many mistakes you make. Now, there are consequences. We're going to discipline you, but that does not change our affection for you. And so that idea of flexibility, and I'll just tell on myself the other day, I got really angry at myself and did something really dumb. And I can't remember what it is now, but I needed to vent my frustration. And I go up to my bedroom thinking, oh, I'll have privacy here. And so I let it all out and turn around. There's Haley for some reason in my room, right? And which only added to my frustration, because it was like the whole purpose of walking away and getting in somewhere else is so that my kids wouldn't see the big anger monster come out and me handle it poorly. So it just doubled down, and it was rough. But hey, I apologized and tried to explain. I didn't try to excuse my behavior, because that was the very reason I was trying to get away, because I knew it wasn't going to be good. are God honoring. But flexibility and sacrifice. I just thought, Ben, that I was a selfless person until I became a parent.
Oh yeah. Hey, it tests it. It tests it a lot, and I think that's what that last thing that you've been talking about, adaptability, that they mentioned on focusonthefamily.com is, being able to adapt to situations, to change the way we approach things, the flexibility of being able to do that. And so, yeah, I thought I was pretty flexible and pretty adaptable and pretty patient until I became a parent too. And I realized how many things I'm kind of set in my own mind. And so, you'll find as your kids grow older, I have kids that range from 19 down to 7. So I've kind of seen the gauntlet of what elementary, middle school, high school, now into workforce, college age.
Ladies and gentlemen, the most flexible man in the world.
No, I wish, but I realize that there's a lot of things I've had to work on and change. And there's things that man, one of the worst statements I guess anybody ever makes is my kids will never blank, whatever that is. When you're watching other people parent, like my kids are never going to do that. And I've had to eat those words a few times. I've tried to be pretty consistent on some of the thoughts that I have, but there's times when you go, all right, that's just not possible. I've got to be a little bit more flexible with that and change my view on it. And so are you willing to do that? There's a thing that we do with people when they're getting married, premarital counseling thing that talks about connections and flexibility of the family of origin. And based on your answers to this survey, it shows kind of what your family looked like, kind of on a quadrant. How flexible were they? How connected were they? And then it will do that for the couple as well. How connected are they? How flexible are they? And it kind of puts them on a quadrant between those two things. And it's always interesting that most of the time, if they were super connected, overly connected to their family of origin and inflexible, that they'll move the opposite direction a lot of times. They'll go from overly connected and inflexible to flexible and less connected with their spouse or their person they're going to marry, because a lot of times people go, hey, it was too strict in my house and I want it to be more flexible. And so they begin to move. And sometimes that's good and sometimes it's bad. Sometimes it's a positive thing. Sometimes it might not be. And so recognizing that you can be overly connected and inflexible with your kids, and they may reject that. They may want to move the other way. At the same time, you can be not very connected, and they want to be connected, and they want to have a little bit of inflexibility because maybe there was no rules, no boundaries. So we talked about rules and limits and boundaries. A lot of times there's a certain level that's good with that. I need boundaries. I need some control. I need somebody to go, this is what you can and can't do. And so a lot of times it's funny just to watch how that shifts. If it was overly connected, they might be less connected. If it was, way too inflexible, they might get more flexible in the way that they deal with people. And so sometimes there's a response to that. So finding a healthy balance of being connected, but not overly connected, and being flexible, but maybe not overly flexible, and not inflexible at all. And so finding sort of that balance in family, I think, is a huge thing.
Yes, flexibility.
Hey, Dodgeball Daredevils, ready to jive and dodge for a cause? Swing by the Staying Alive Disco Dodgeball Tournament at Mars Hill Bible School in Florence, Alabama on August the 17th. Head to benandtravis.com/dodgeball to snag your or your team's spot and support St. Jude Children's Hospital. Let's dodge, dip, dive, duck, and donate our way to victory. It's going to be a blast, so don't miss out. Sponsorships are now available. For more information, email hello@benandtravis.com.
TravisLovesHaiti.com. Question of the day, Ben. You mentioned my kids will never. You got one of those you'd share? Maybe one that you've eaten the most? I don't know. I can go ahead and do mine.
Go ahead.
You went to Marcel Bible School, Ben, and I never had a problem with you being a private school kid, but there were a couple of times I had some interactions with your buddies, and I can remember the phrase, "My kids will never go to private school." Right?
And
Not only do they go to private school, I go to private school. I teach at one. So there's the one that came to mind. There are many, but that would be one that I've eaten hard, like knocked all my teeth out.
Sometimes it has to do with dress code. My kids are never going to wear this or wear that. And that probably has been eaten a time or two. Some of it is, I think, my understanding of things has changed, the way that I see what all that means. And that doesn't mean that modesty is not important, but I think that there's probably a level where in my own mind, I felt like this was the place of modesty. Sometimes that was just off. And so
modest is the hottest band. As long as you don't be letting them wear that Tennessee orange, we're okay.
Exactly. So, probably that, there's probably a couple of things that, I had different mindset about, than others. It probably my kids are always going to be at every event that happens at church or something along that line. And then there's been times when I go, hey, it's okay to be flexible with this. Sometimes there's some things that they, I want them to go to. And I even told kids growing up when I was working with kids in the youth group, you don't have to be at every event. But you should be at some of the events. We have a lot of them. But there's probably some things along that line that I've gotten a little bit less or a little bit more flexible with my kids on.
Cool. All right, Ben. Well, I appreciate it jumping on. You can find that article. I think I should tag it there in the description, but we appreciate Focus on the Family putting out those 7 points, and we'll talk at you guys again later.
Hey folks, on August 24th, join us at the Marriott Shoals Conference Center for the 2024 Heritage event, sponsored by Heritage Christian University. This year, we're proud to have Ricky Skaggs and Kentucky Thunder headlining. Experience an incredible evening of bluegrass music while supporting a great cause. All proceeds are used to prepare students for thriving ministries worldwide. Secure your tickets at hcu.edu today, and I'll see you there.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.